As he began to unravel his secret, one he'd guarded with every fiber of his being, it hit me. All these years, all those moments, I had been blind. My heart ached with the realization of how much he meant to me, and how foolish I had been not to recognize it sooner. The weight of regret pressed heavily on my chest. "Dean, I faltered. I never realized." His fingers tightened around mine, offering solace. "Sometimes," he whispered, "we don't see what's in front of us until the right moment arrives." I leaned in, the scent of his cologne enveloping me, the world narrowing to just us two. I would give anything to turn back time, to see clearly from the start. But in that instant, one thing was certain. I was irrevocably in love with Dean. My name is Elle, and this is my story. I'd never been one to believe in fate, destiny, or any kind of predetermined paths. Life, in my view, was a series of choices, each one leading to another in an endless cycle. It was during a summer trip to New Orleans with college friends. We had stumbled upon an old hidden shop, the kind that smelled of incense and mystery. It was run by an elderly woman named Madame Laveau, who claimed to be a descendant of the famous voodoo queen of the same name. "You," she pointed at me, her long, bony finger adorned with several rings. "You have a question in your heart." Intrigued, and partially to entertain my friends, I sat down opposite her. She spread out a deck of tarot cards and began flipping them one by one. The room was filled with an eerie silence, save for the soft whispers of the cards as they revealed their secrets. "You will find happiness," Madame Laveau began, her voice a raspy whisper, "but only with a man with eyes as deep as the ocean." I looked at her in confusion. "What does that mean?" "Blue eyes," she stated simply, her gaze piercing into mine. "Your destiny is intertwined with a man with blue eyes." At the time, I had laughed it off, taking it as a fun story to share back home. Little did I know how much weight those words would carry in my life. Months turned into years, and I found myself gravitating towards men with blue eyes. It wasn't a conscious choice, not really, but somewhere in the back of my mind, Madame Laveau's prediction lingered. There was Rob, with his ice blue eyes, then Alex, with eyes the color of a clear summer sky. But each relationship, while filled with moments of joy, also had its share of heartbreak and pain. In the midst of this azure-eyed whirlwind, I met Dean. Dean, with his deep, soulful brown eyes. There was an intensity about him, a raw passion that drew me in. We became fast friends, and over time, it became evident that his feelings for me ran deeper. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't attracted to him. There were moments, fleeting and rare, when I'd get lost in his gaze, feeling a warmth and connection I hadn't felt with anyone else. But every time things started to get serious, the fortune teller's words would echo in my mind. Could I truly be happy with a man without blue eyes? One evening, as we sat on my apartment's balcony, overlooking the city lights, Dean took my hand. "Elle," he began, his voice shaky, "I love you." The weight of those words, the emotion behind them, made my heart race. I wanted to say it back, to let myself be loved and to love in return. But the memory of the prophecy held me back. "Dean," I began, tears forming in my eyes, "I care about you deeply, but I can't be with you." He looked at me, confusion evident in his eyes. "Is it because of my eyes?" I was taken aback. How did he know? He chuckled bitterly. "I've seen the way you look at men with blue eyes. There's a longing there, a depth, that I've never seen when you look at me." It broke my heart to hear him say that. I tried to explain, to tell him about Madame Laveau and her prophecy. But the more I spoke, the more absurd it sounded, even to my own ears. We ended the night in silence, each lost in our own world of thoughts and emotions. A few days later, Dean moved out of the city, leaving behind only a note. "Find your happiness, Ella, wherever and with whomever it may be." The guilt and regret weighed heavily on me. I had let go of a love that was real, tangible, for a prophecy that might never come true. The days turned into weeks, then months. I dated a few more blue-eyed men, but my heart wasn't in it. The magic, the connection I'd once felt, seemed to have disappeared. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I pulled out the tarot cards I'd bought on a whim from Madame Laveau's shop. I shuffled them, trying to find answers, some guidance. The cards revealed a mix of images: cups, swords, a wheel of fortune. But the one that stood out was the Lover's card. 2 figures, one with deep blue eyes and the other with warm brown ones. Suddenly, it all became clear. The prophecy was not about finding happiness with a blue-eyed man. It was about finding balance, accepting love in all its forms, and not being bound by preconceived notions. With newfound determination, I decided to track down Dean, to apologize, to tell him how I truly felt. I didn't know if he'd take me back, but I knew I had to try. As I embarked on this new journey, one thing was clear. True love wasn't about the color of one's eyes. It was about the depth of one's soul. And I was ready to dive deep, to find my happiness wherever it may be. Time, they say, heals all wounds. And with the turning of seasons, the past became a mere speck in the distance. New York, with its fast-paced life and never-ending chaos, helped me move on. I continued to meet people, often drawn to those with blue eyes, the shadow of Madame Laveau's prediction always looming in the background. It had been a few years since my last encounter with Dean. In my daily life, he was almost forgotten, yet deep down, a part of me still yearned for those stolen moments, those whispered conversations, and those long walks along the river. My dating life was a series of short-lived romances, none of which ever reached the depth and connection I once shared with Dean. But life went on. With each passing day, I became more engrossed in my work, my friends, and my life in the city. It was on one such busy day as I rushed through Central Park that I saw him again. Dean, standing by the famous Bow Bridge, deep in conversation with a friend. The urge to walk past, unnoticed, was strong, but something stopped me in my tracks. His eyes, they were blue, the same deep, vivid blue that had once captivated me. Confused, I approached him, my heart racing. "Dean?" He looked up, startled, and then broke into a smile. "Elle, it's been so long." There was warmth in his voice, but something was different. The connection, the spark that had once existed, seemed to have faded. I couldn't help but ask, "Your eyes, weren't they—" Dean laughed, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. "I wore colored lenses. I always hated the color of my eyes, thought they made me look plain. But recently, I've started to embrace my natural self." The revelation was shocking. The man I had loved, the man whose eyes had once haunted my dreams, had been hiding his true self all along. Suddenly, memories flooded back. Our first meeting, the intensity of his gaze, the moments when our souls seemed to connect. And then, the realization that perhaps I'd never really known him at all. Before I could process my thoughts, a voice interrupted us. "Babe, who's this?" A young woman with striking green eyes approached, her arm slipping around Dean's. The intimacy between them was evident, and it didn't take long for me to piece together the puzzle. "This is Ella, an old friend," Dean introduced, his voice neutral. "Nice to meet you," she replied with a courteous nod, her eyes never leaving mine. The unspoken challenge was clear. The awkwardness was palpable. Here I was, face to face with the man I had once loved, a man who was now in love with someone else. After a few minutes of strained conversation, I made my excuses and left, the weight of the encounter pressing down on me. As I walked away, the truth hit me hard. All these years, I'd been chasing a fantasy, holding on to a prophecy that had no basis in reality. I had let a fortune teller dictate my choices, my relationships, and my life. Madame Laveau's words echoed in my ears, but for the first time, I questioned their validity. Maybe the prophecy was never about the color of one's eyes. Maybe it was about seeing beyond the superficial, about finding someone who truly understood and connected with my soul. With newfound clarity, I decided to let go of the past, to move forward, and to trust my heart. After all, it was the only compass I needed. The days turned into weeks and then months. With each passing day, the weight of the past lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and contentment. I began to see the world with fresh eyes, to appreciate the beauty in the mundane, and to cherish the connections that were genuine and deep. Life was no longer about chasing a prophecy or finding the perfect blue-eyed man. It was about living in the moment, about embracing the present, and about finding happiness within. And as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, overlooking the city lights, a smile played on my lips. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led me to where I was meant to be. The city, with its hustle and bustle, its highs and lows, was a reflection of life itself. And as I looked out into the vast expanse, one thing was clear. True happiness didn't lie in predictions or prophecies. It lay in trusting oneself, in following one's heart, and in finding joy in the little moments that made life worth living. And with that thought, I stepped into the future, my heart light and my soul free, ready to embrace whatever life had in store.